Hello and welcome to the fourth webinar in the Australian Sailing Conference webinar series. My name's Gary Langford and I'm a member of the Australian Sailing Board. Happen to be based down here in Tasmania. Hopefully everybody's fit and well out there in this world that we're currently in. It's certainly difficult times for many of us. This year's club conference webinars are taking place on Thursday evenings throughout the winter. The webinars give the presenters the opportunity to provide a live presentation followed by a Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout tonight's presentation, please ask away and don't forget to include your name and club. Recordings of these webinars will be made available online so you can refer back to them for those that are unable to make it at the scheduled time. You may or may not be aware, but currently nominations for the Australian Sailing Awards close tomorrow. So if you do know anyone in our great sport doing something that deserves recognition, I encourage you to nominate them via our website. Tonight's presentation is Club Insurance, presented by Joel Steendam from Network Steadfast. Joel has worked with Network Steadfast for the past 8.5 years and is the National Manager of Schemes and Affinity. Joel says he's into boats, but unfortunately doesn't own one. Welcome, Joel.
Thanks very much, Gary. And thank you everybody for taking the time out to obviously get involved and learn a bit more about insurance and allowing me to sort of go through the covers and considerations that you should be thinking of as a club. So I guess the reason that I'm in front of you guys today or digitally in front of you is to remind you of some of the traps and some of the pitfalls that you can get stuck in and some of the insurances that the clubs may not even think of on a day-to-day basis. So just to refer to us, we're Network Insurance Group or Network Steadfast, and we're the appointed broker for Australian Sailing, and we look after many of the clubs around the country as well. And this is on the screen here, just our websites, and there's also the Sailing Resources website on the Australian Sailing pages that you can get access to all the insurance information that you need, whether it be a club, class associations, or even the trainers and the instructors and coaches as well. So some of the insurances that the clubs should be considering at a minimum, most importantly, obviously, is liability insurance. Most members would be aware of the personal accident insurance that's in place as well. We certainly get a lot of traction with that in terms of people coming forward with injuries and looking for assistance. So that's done via our office as well. Then following on from that is obviously the club property, which you do need to insure. And then after that is the marine hull insurances, whether some clubs, they might insure the club-owned boats as well as some of the members' boats under a particular scheme, but a lot of clubs just insure the fleet of the club themselves. And then one insurance that's not necessarily thought of as a regular type of insurance is management liability, which effectively covers the company for things such as employment practices liability, crime from within the company, fidelity, things like that. And there's also statutory liability and tax implications with that as well. So for the liability insurance, we do have an arrangement with a couple of different insurers that we offer to the clubs. It's really important when you're considering liability insurance as a yacht club that you do seek out specialty marine insurers. A lot of the general insurers will have exclusions for water-based events. So on-water coverage is not something that's necessarily standard. So that can be one of the traps that the clubs fall into, going and getting that cheaper premium from a generalist insurer and not actually understanding that they might not actually have the cover that they necessarily need. So that type of insurance is going to cover you for, slip and trip type exposures on the property, but as well, in addition to that, it's the regattas that you're organising, any events or fundraising events that you might have off-site as well. Generally speaking, we recommend that clubs have at least 20 million of public liability. Some of the larger clubs can have up to 50 or 100 million, but that's a little bit above standard these days. And look, with the liability insurance, if you are with a specialty marine insurer, these policies are tailored specifically for yacht clubs and boating clubs, fishing clubs, things like that. And they actually have, as I said before, those extensions in their covers that really give you that peace of mind. And, you know when you're dealing with marine insurers, most of the guys, whether it be Club Marine, Nautilus, or there's also Trident out of WA, they're all yachties and boaties themselves, so they understand the risk, they understand what your exposures are, and they can actually cover you properly. Some of the traps that you should be aware of, which we have seen have claims declined in the past, is hot works exclusions. So if you've got yards there where people are working, whether it be contractors or you allow some of your members to do work on their own boats, look through the policy really carefully and make sure if they are doing hot works, you actually have cover for that. So the professional services sort of comes into play there as well. If you've got people repairing boats, and also if you've got people that are doing inspections of boats prior to races, things like that, make sure you've got a professional services extension on your liability insurances as well. And for some of the larger clubs, if you've got restaurants or even a canteen, for some of the smaller ones, make sure that you've declared to the insurer that you do actually have those kitchen activities, that there are sales associated with food, things like that. So the personal injury insurance is something that comes automatic to members of Australian Sailing affiliated clubs. So it's a pretty broad cover. It's a personal accident cover. It's not a life insurance type of product. So it's meant for injury and accident. So it covers your out-of-pocket medical expenses for anything that's not covered by Medicare, up to $5,000. So things like physio, if there's necessary surgery that's not covered by Medicare. That includes broken bones and broken teeth, which you didn't historically used to, which is one of the most common forms of injury. And it does have, in the unfortunate event that it occurred, it does have some death benefits and funeral benefits in there as well. And as I said before, the physiotherapy component. So the property insurance. So the property insurance is fairly standard all the way throughout Australia, with most insurers being able to cover your buildings adequately. The only trap that I would recommend is if you've got the club over water or right on the water, make sure you check the policy to see if storm surge or action of the sea is covered by the policy. In some cases, we found that it's not, and there has been events where the cover hasn't been upheld. So the things that you need to consider there is obviously property, contents and stock cover, but there's also business interruption cover there as well, which is really important if you are operating a commercial type arrangement within the premises, say whether it be a restaurant or a bar. If you did have a claim and you started to lose those profits, it's a really important section to have, because the insurer will pay your loss of profits for the period of time it takes you to actually get back to 100% operationality. And then the other covers are theft, glass, and then the general property covers. So this type of policy wouldn't cover any of the club-owned boats. That needs to be under the marine hull policy, which I'll talk about next. But in terms of the sums insured, I recommend that every year you do a really strong review prior to the renewal and make sure that you are adequately insuring the building, particularly if you've got a changeover of committee on a regular basis. If people are just going through the motions with insurance and it's a grudge purchase, it is what it is, and we'll just roll it over. There's some clubs that may not have reviewed those figures for quite some time, and you might be finding yourself severely underinsured. And then with the business interruption covers, if you did have a total loss and it was a building that was going to take quite some time to rebuild, you have to consider things like the planning, approval, then the tendering of who's going to be doing the actual work, the work itself, any possible interruptions in that time. It can quite often take significantly longer than the 12-month period to rebuild the premises, which means that you're continually losing the profits over that time. So marine hull, it is a fairly standard cover throughout the marine world. It's basically the car insurance version for boats. It covers you while you're racing, covers you while you're just doing recreational yachting or sailing, and it also covers the boat while it's laid up at your premises as well. So most of the marine insurers have very similar products. Pretty much all of the insurers have a 24-hour claim service. At the end of the day, with the marine specialists, it pretty much comes down to price and service. So we've got several different insurers that we deal with for marine hull. And if you did want to have a look into that, or if it's something that you haven't reviewed in a period of time, I'm more than happy to have a look at that. I didn't want to bore you all for too long, and I know every year that more often than not, it's the questions that you guys have that you're here for. So hopefully that was a good jog of the memory for you from an insurance perspective. And if you have any questions, please type them in, and we'll get cracking on those. Okay, there's a question here from Nick. Is there an exclusion for breach of liquor license? Example, if the club fails to prevent a customer taking an open drink outside the club boundary? No, not under a standard policy necessarily would you have an exclusion for breaching your liquor license. In the event that you're held negligent for that, it's not. No, the answer is no. Under standard policies, you really need to be. It's something that's really difficult to find you negligent for, and if you were held to account on that, the insurer would defend you in that matter. I haven't seen any other questions coming through yet. There we go. Okay, so that's a good question from Chris. So thoughts on voluntary workers comp insurance for clubs. So the personal accident program actually does cover voluntary workers whilst they are on your premises if they do injure themselves. So voluntary workers cover as a standalone policy will cover any of your voluntary workers for accident whilst they're on your premises or whilst they're conducting activities on your behalf. Now, with the personal accident program, the extent of the cover for voluntary workers is on the premises only, or whilst travelling to and from the premises to do voluntary work on your behalf. What it doesn't cover is if any of your voluntary workers are going out on the water and are engaged in sailing activities, whether they be timing or measuring or whatever they're doing, the minute that they are not at the premises or not travelling to and from the premises on land, they are no longer covered. So if you are doing that with your voluntary workers, then yes, I would recommend considering taking out the voluntary workers because you do have a gap in your cover there. Okay, next question from Alison's personal injury cover for only on club property and its events. That's for the voluntary workers only on the property. For your members, if they are sailing recreationally, if they are sailing competitively, if they're on your premises, if they are in the yard, taking their boat out of the water, they are covered. So it's not just for events; it is for sailing activities of any kind. The intention of the cover is to cover people that are injured whilst sailing, so members that are injured while sailing, and then there's the additional covers that are covered, like the voluntary workers on the premises. But the primary intention is to cover you when you're injured while sailing, whether it be recreational, practicing for an event, or an actual event. Next question from Jonathan. Clubs over water, which I mentioned before to think about when you're thinking about property insurance. Are there any insurance companies who are covering properties over water at present? Yes, there is a couple that will consider it. Trident are one that they don't normally include it, but they are willing to consider it with their security. They don't necessarily agree to it in every case. They review each case on a case-by-case basis. And QBE is another one that we've had success in covering clubs over water with. Apart from that, in the last 12 months, I don't have any other examples of other insurers that will willingly cover a club over the water. Nautilus, for one, definitely don't, although they have recently changed their security, so that may change in the coming months as they get into the swing of their new underwriter security. Okay. Another question, do I need to be a financial member of a club to be covered by the accident insurance? So you don't need to be a financial member of the club if you are a voluntary worker and you are on the premises. Otherwise, you do need to be a financial member of a club or a life member of the club. There's also, in the Australian Sailing Accident Program, cover for people that are on day passes. So as long as you're registered as a day pass user, sail pass, sorry, that you are also covered by the program. So you don't have to be a fully fledged financial member, but you can be you can be covered if you are a sail pass participant or a participant in a Discover Sailing course as well. Okay, from Alistair, do we do individual boat insurance? And if so, are there special rates for AS members? We do individual boat insurance. We do a lot of off the beach craft as well. We've got a portal on our website that historically had been extremely cheap. It was through Nautilus, and with some of the changes they've had to their company structure and the change of their security, that pricing has recently increased, unfortunately, and we're going through the process now of switching that to Club Marine, which we have updated the portal to be Club Marine on our website, but we're still working on the pricing aspect, but we expect that to be resolved fairly shortly. But effectively, it's the exact same rates as a if you went to Club Marine and quoted through them, or you came to us, the rates would be very similar. In some cases, ours is lower already on some classes that we've agreed upon, but we're working on getting that even lower very soon. Management liability re-COVID controls from Ron. Thanks for that, Ron. It's a bit of a tricky one. It varies state to state because me being down here in Victoria, we're all in lockdown at the moment, and there's a bit of free movement now in Queensland and other areas. So it really it's more about the word that I'm looking for. A common sense approach really applies here. And if there's any kind of exposure as the club's reopening, it's really important that you have a COVID management plan in place. And if anything were to occur, that you stick to that. If you are held accountable or given any statutory fines or anything for the way that you have handled that situation, the policy would assist in responding to investigating that. Fines and penalties aren't necessarily always covered by a management liability policy, so it really depends on the insurer that you'd be with, but the policy would respond to defend you in the very least, and have some investigational costs through legal matters and whatnot. But one of the things that an insurer would expect of a club is to have a fairly solid management plan in place before you reopen, because it's something that's not going away at the moment. So everybody's aware of COVID and how contagious it is, and it's really important that clubs take measures to make sure they have management plans in place. Okay, from Alistair, purely for interest, because we are all dealing with it, how is the COVID crisis impacting on your company and the insurance industry? It's having a massive impact on the insurance industry, actually. Us as a company, we're all working from home, so I'm sitting here in my study now. We have seen, we offer insurances to a significant amount of industries, and we've seen from the industries that have been really affected by this, companies are shutting down, companies are reducing their cover. In some cases, they're willing to go uninsured because of the costs associated with insurance and the downturn in their income. And, as a consequence of that, we obviously, cancelling covers and whatnot, we have seen a downturn in our company as well. But, as the journey goes on and we all start to get back slowly to normal, we should see that rectify, as should everybody else. But it's definitely having a massive impact on the insurance industry, particularly with insurers, especially insurers that offer travel insurance. They've been hit really hard with a lot of significant claims prior to for trips booked prior to COVID, and it's had a huge impact. From Denny, if you own multiple off the beach boats, liability and rates. Yep. So if you've got a couple of boats, I'd recommend actually contacting me rather than going through that portal that I mentioned earlier, because we can package that up for you and then get a better rate. Is there an age upper limit for covering volunteers on the water? it's usually, if you're looking at a standalone voluntary workers policy, it's usually up to the age of 65. Thanks for that, Anne. So from Steve, if volunteer has a sail pass for the day, are they covered whilst assisting on a duty rescue boat the same as a financial member? The answer to that is yes. Suzette, we have carers sail with their disabled sailing participants. They are rarely members and not listed as our volunteers. How would they be covered by insurance, please? Look, I'd probably have to have a chat to you about that and get some more details on that. So if you want to give me a call tomorrow. From what you're saying, if they're not listed as members or if they're not listed as volunteers and they are sailing in some capacity, at the moment I don't think they would be covered under the policy. So please give me a call about that and I'll have a chat to you. From Rod, are there any specific insurance coverage issues we should consider for our training of juniors, including their trainer? So look, the trainer absolutely should have their own insurance, or if you're happy to list them on the club's policy as a subcontractor, or if they are an employee, they would be covered. But if they're a subcontractor to your company, I would recommend that you let whoever your liability insurer is know and have them listed on the policy as a trainer. In terms of the juniors themselves, as long as they're members, they'll be covered by the personal accident policy. Will a club's public liability insurance protect a club in circumstances where an injury occurs to a sailor and the club is negligent rather than the Australian Sailing PA policy? And that's from Chris. Thanks, Chris. Yes, the answer to that is yes. The personal accident policy will still be able to cover the sailor, but if you are, as a club, dragged into the matter and held accountable for that injury and costs associated with that, and you had organised an event and, I don't know, as an example, maybe the weather was poor and you decided to go ahead with the event and then people were injured, then yes, your liability policy will absolutely respond to defend you and the costs that you incur.
Thanks, Joel. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us today. I think your expertise in this area of club insurance has been very informative, and we hope it's provided some valuable things for the clubs to take away. I think for me, knowing how much energy we're putting into Sail Pass and the opportunity that provides to clubs to make an easy registration of their members participating in their activities, it should make it easier, I guess, because it completes that registration process. And once you're registered, the insurer is happy to take that risk. So that's great. Thank you to everybody for joining us today. As mentioned earlier, don't forget to get those nominations in for Australian Sailing Awards by tomorrow. This presentation will be made available to view online on the Australian Sailing Club conferences page. And join us next week with presenter Brett Yardley from Brighton and Seacliff Yacht Club in South Australia, as he presents on how Australian sailing programs and resources can help with your club retention. So thanks again, and see you next week. Bye.